When my husband and my sister sat on my sofa, looked me dead in the eye, and said their affair was none of my business, I did not scream. I just packed his things into trash bags. Exactly 5 years later, they are crying on the phone, begging me to save them from a $20 million fraud conviction. They have absolutely no idea that I am the one holding the match to burn their lives to the ground. Hello, and welcome back to the Violet Revenge Stories channel. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep operating. If you find today's story compelling, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can maintain a budget to pay our hard-working team, helping them cover their living expenses and continue creating high-quality stories to serve you. You can show your support by scanning the QR code on the donation page currently on your screen, or by clicking the donation link in the description or the comments section of this video. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Adeline Powell. I am 32 years old, and for a long time, I genuinely believed I had engineered the perfect life. I work as a senior structural engineer at Vanguard Dynamics, one of the most prominent aerospace technology corporations based right here in the perpetually rainy, gray city of Seattle. My professional life is defined by heavy responsibilities, load calculations, stress tests, and ensuring that massive structures do not collapse under atmospheric pressure. Ironically, I was so hyper-focused on guaranteeing the structural integrity of commercial aircrafts that I completely failed to notice the fatal stress fractures forming right beneath the foundation of my own home. Without question, I was the solid ground and the absolute financial backbone of my family. I had been married for 4 years to Julian, to the outside world. Julian was a brilliant, misunderstood freelance architect. He possessed this rugged, bohemian, and effortlessly romantic charm that easily drew people into his orbit. He was a man composed entirely of sweeping visions, constantly talking passionately about the purity of art and his grand dreams of launching a revolutionary design startup. The quiet, unspoken reality, however, was that his income was dangerously unstable. He lived entirely off the economic foundation I provided, spending his days sketching concepts that never seemed to find a paying client. I never complained. I loved him deeply, and I believed that being a good partner meant investing unconditionally in his potential. Then there was my sister, Clara, at 27 years old. Clara made her living as a lifestyle blogger and social media influencer. She was strikingly beautiful, endlessly vain, and operated in a world of curated aesthetics. Beneath her polished online persona, she viewed me less as a big sister and more as a convenient, bottomless bank account she could lean on whenever her sponsored posts failed to cover her expensive tastes. Julian and Clara formed an incredibly tight bond. He naturally slid into the role of the exceptionally attentive, psychologically supportive older brother she claimed she always needed. I was profoundly proud of the comfortable little universe I had built for us. Using my hefty corporate bonuses and years of savings, I purchased a stunning, fully automated smart home nestled in the quiet, upscale suburbs of Seattle. I wanted my home to be a sanctuary for the people I loved. I poured money into custom designing a breathtaking, sun-drenched architectural studio specifically for Julian, hoping it would inspire his startup dreams. For Clara, I hired professionals to furnish the main living room with chic, high-end decor, giving her the perfect stylish backdrop to shoot her daily vlogs whenever she visited. Looking back, the subtle signs of abnormality were everywhere, quietly pulsing under the surface. Julian and Clara began sharing these frequent, stealthy glances across the kitchen island. They developed a private, exclusionary language of inside jokes, mostly revolving around robotic people who blindly bury their faces in their work and forget how to live. It was a thinly veiled, mocking reference to my demanding work schedule. Whenever I paused to question them, Clara would just giggle and say, "Oh, Adeline, do not be so serious. You are just too much of a machine to understand our creative wavelength." I always brushed those moments away. I was simply too exhausted from pulling 60-hour work weeks and far too trusting to realize that the two people I was breaking my back to support were actually laughing at me in the very house I bought for them. The atmosphere in our house slowly transformed from a sanctuary into an unbearable pressure cooker. Julian's startup pitches were failing, one after another. Venture capitalists wanted concrete business models, realistic revenue projections, and scalable operations. All he offered them were abstract architectural concepts and defensive arrogance. Instead of refining his strategy or accepting constructive criticism, his frustration curdled into a deep, toxic resentment directed squarely at me. The argument started late at night, his voice echoing sharply off the high ceilings of our pristine living room. He demanded I liquidate my entire emergency savings, a safety net I had meticulously built over 7 grueling years, to seed his venture, when I refused. Pointing out the immense financial risk and the burden of our existing mortgage, his eyes hardened with a cold fury. He accused me of being painfully pragmatic, claiming I possessed the imagination of a brick wall and fundamentally lacked the vision to support true creative genius. Clara, somehow, was always present during the suffocating aftermath of these fights. She would drape herself elegantly over the custom velvet armchair, sipping expensive artisanal coffee paid for by my credit card, and effortlessly side with my husband. "You are being far too rigid, Adeline," she would sigh, her tone dripping with condescending pity, while she adjusted the ring light for her next video. Men need a muse to inspire them, not an ATM machine that knows how to nag. If you do not nurture his dreams with absolute faith, how can you ever expect him to thrive in a competitive market? Her words were carefully calibrated drops of poison, designed to make me feel like the oppressive villain in my own home. She played the role of the empathetic peacemaker, but every sentence she spoke subtly chipped away at my confidence. The sheer exhaustion began to seep deeply into my bones. At Vanguard Dynamics, the pressure was reaching a critical mass. I was managing a highly stressed team of 50 engineers, overseeing the structural compliance of a multi-billion-dollar aerospace project with entirely merciless deadlines. I would return home after 14-hour shifts, my brain completely fried, desperate for just a tiny shred of comfort or a warm embrace. Instead, I was consistently met with a chilling wall of apathy. Julian stopped asking about my day. He retreated into the expensive studio I had built for him, locking the heavy oak door behind him for hours on end. Worse, the subtle, ingrained habits of his daily life began to radically shift. The smartphone that used to sit carelessly face up on the kitchen counter was suddenly glued to his side every second of the day. The simple 4-digit passcode I had known since our wedding day was abruptly changed. When I casually asked him about it, he brushed it off with a defensive laugh, claiming it was just a mandatory security update recommended by his tech-savvy friends to protect his proprietary designs. Then came the weekends, almost every Friday afternoon. He suddenly had urgent site surveys, material sourcing trips, or exclusive networking retreats. He would pack a leather duffel bag and vanish for 48 hours, leaving me entirely alone to wander the quiet halls of a massive, empty house. The undeniable proof of his deceit slipped right through my fingers on a freezing Tuesday morning. I was gathering laundry for the dry cleaners when I reached deep into the inner pocket of his heavy winter coat. My fingers brushed against a crumpled, slightly stiff piece of thermal paper. I pulled it out and smoothed the wrinkled edges against the countertop. It was a finalized, itemized receipt for a luxurious 3-night stay at an ultra-exclusive ski resort in Aspen, Colorado. The total charge was nearly $8,000, and the payment method listed at the bottom was a platinum credit card I absolutely did not recognize. A sickening jolt of pure adrenaline hit my chest, making my hands shake uncontrollably. When I confronted him that evening, holding the damning slip of paper under the harsh kitchen pendant lights, he did not even flinch. His expression remained entirely composed. He smoothly and effortlessly claimed he had gone with a potential male investor, a notoriously wealthy angel backer who insisted on absolute privacy. According to Julian, this elusive billionaire paid for the entire trip, but required Julian to put the initial deposit down on a temporary corporate card to secure the booking under a different entity. It was an incredibly elaborate, deeply confusing lie, yet he delivered it with such unwavering, almost aggressive confidence that my sleep-deprived, logically exhausted brain actually struggled to dismantle it. I felt utterly untethered, isolated in a distorted reality where my own perceptions were constantly being weaponized against me, hoping for a grounding voice of reason. I called my parents, who had been comfortably enjoying their retirement down in sunny Florida for the past 5 years. I tried to express my deep-seated fears, the crushing, unbearable weight of my corporate job, and the terrifying, growing chasm between Julian and me. Instead of offering maternal comfort, my mother delivered a sharp, unforgiving reprimand. Her voice crackled through the phone speaker, harsh and entirely unsympathetic. "You are far too focused on climbing the corporate ladder. Adeline," she scolded me impatiently, "you are completely neglecting your fundamental duties as a wife. A man needs attention and respect, no matter how many impressive promotions you get or how much money you drag home. It means absolutely nothing if you cannot keep your home warm and your husband happy. You are pushing him away with your endless career obsession. You need to apologize, swallow your pride, and make time for him." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I stood perfectly still in the middle of a living room that felt increasingly like a beautifully decorated, airtight cage. The pressure was building rapidly, a silent, invisible, and destructive force pressing intensely against the structural supports of my sanity, warning me that a catastrophic collapse was no longer just a possibility, but an absolute certainty. A violent storm rolled in off the Pacific on a late Thursday evening, bringing heavy rain that battered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the living room. Around 9 o'clock, a massive lightning strike knocked out the main power grid for a fraction of a second. It was just long enough to send the central server of our highly integrated smart home into a complete and utter tailspin. The automated lighting plunged into total darkness, the ambient temperature control system shut down entirely, and the electronic deadbolts hummed with a recurring, flashing red error code. Julian was predictably absent, supposedly attending a late-night zoning board meeting downtown, followed by drinks with potential contractors. In the past, I would have immediately called the ridiculously overpriced tech support hotline and waited 48 hours for a condescending technician to arrive, but I was already on edge, entirely fed up with waiting for things to be fixed. I am a senior structural engineer, dealing with complex, multi-layered aerospace systems daily. Rebooting a domestic network-attached storage drive and recalibrating a central routing hub was practically muscle memory. I grabbed my work laptop and a high-speed Ethernet cable. I walked down the dark hallway, using my phone flashlight, and sat cross-legged on the cold hardwood floor of the main utility closet. I hardwired my machine directly into the primary switchboard. The fan of my laptop whirred softly as I brought up the administrative console. I began running standard diagnostic scripts to flush the corrupted cache and realign the internal IP addresses, while carefully monitoring the data flow on our localized family cloud network to ensure no security breaches had occurred during the outage. Something highly irregular caught my attention. There was a massive, encrypted partition on the solid-state drive, consuming nearly 500 gigabytes of storage space, utterly hidden away from the main directory tree. It was nested deep within an archived folder labeled with the name of an old, abandoned architectural proposal Julian had pitched 3 years ago. My engineering instincts immediately flared. The directory was heavily encrypted, locked behind a highly complex security protocol that no standard architectural software would ever require for simple building blueprints. It was a deliberate, sophisticated digital firewall designed specifically to keep me out of that specific sector of the drive. My exhaustion vanished instantly, replaced by an icy, hyper-focused adrenaline. I ran a brute force script, bypassed the standard administrative port, and utilized a backdoor network exploit I had learned during my advanced cybersecurity training at Vanguard Dynamics. It took exactly 22 agonizing minutes for the encryption wall to crack and shatter. The folder did not contain computer-aided design drawings or structural renders. The first subdirectory I opened was labeled strictly with financial dates. My fingers trembled slightly, slick with cold sweat, as I clicked open a high-resolution scanned PDF document. It was a formal operating agreement for a newly established limited liability company. I stared at the signature line at the bottom of the last page, my vision suddenly blurring at the edges. There were two managing partners listed with an exact 50-50 ownership split: Julian Powell and Clara Harrison, my husband and my sister. I dug deeper, opening bank transfer records, notarized letters, and loan agreements. The shell company was not just an empty legal vessel, it was heavily funded. I felt the breath get violently knocked out of my lungs when I found a signed home equity line of credit document. Julian had somehow manipulated my digital signature and leveraged the equity of our smart home to pull out $250,000 in cash to bankroll their shared enterprise. He had literally mortgaged the roof over my head, risking the financial security I had broken my back to build, to fund a secret life with my own flesh and blood. But the financial devastation was merely the prologue to the true nightmare. The second subdirectory was simply titled with a single red heart emoji. I clicked it, and a grid of hundreds of high-definition photographs and large video files populated my screen. They were from Aspen. There was no wealthy, secretive male investor. The pictures showed Clara wearing the incredibly expensive designer ski jacket I had bought her for her 27th birthday, wrapping her arms intimately around my husband in a private, steaming outdoor hot tub. There were videos of them drinking imported champagne, kissing passionately against the breathtaking backdrop of snow-capped mountains, and laughing uncontrollably. I sat completely paralyzed in the dimly lit closet, forced to watch the two people I loved most in the world desecrate my entire existence. Then I found the exported chat logs. There were tens of thousands of text messages spanning nearly 2 years. I scrolled through the endless, rapid-fire strings of text, reading their unfiltered thoughts. They mocked the custom studio I had built for him. They laughed about how easy it was to fool me. Clara had sent a message saying, "She is just a stupid money-making machine, completely oblivious to everything around her as long as she has her engineering spreadsheets." Julian had replied immediately, "Let her keep working those crazy 60-hour weeks. Her paycheck is just funding our true love. Baby, we just need to endure her a little longer until the company takes off, and then we are free." The bright screen glowed harshly against my face, illuminating the absolute wreckage of my reality. A violent wave of physical nausea surged from the pit of my stomach, crashing up into my throat. I slammed the laptop shut, frantically scrambled out of the confined utility closet, and barely made it to the center of the dark living room before my knees buckled entirely. I collapsed onto the expensive Persian rug, clutching my stomach as I began to dry heave violently. The physical pain in my chest was so sharp, so profound, that I genuinely thought my heart was rupturing into pieces. I gasped for air, curled into a tight, pathetic ball on the floor. I waited for the blinding tears to come. I waited for the hysterical, world-shattering screams of a betrayed wife to rip through my vocal cords. But nothing came. As the seconds ticked by, the agonizing, suffocating panic slowly began to recede, draining away into the floorboards. In its place, a dead, absolute, and terrifyingly cold silence rushed in to fill the massive void in my mind. The devoted, hard-working, and endlessly trusting woman died right there on that rug. What rose from the floor a few minutes later was something entirely different. Something forged in absolute zero, calculating, and utterly devoid of mercy. I did not shed a single tear. The searing pain in my chest had entirely calcified, leaving behind a chilling, mechanical efficiency. I stood up from the floor, walked straight into the kitchen, and pulled out a fresh roll of heavy-duty black plastic contractor bags. I marched upstairs to the master bedroom and began tearing Julian's meticulously curated wardrobe from the hangers. Expensive Italian wool suits, cashmere sweaters I had bought for his birthdays, vintage denim jeans, Everything was shoved unceremoniously into the garbage bags. I dragged them down the stairs one by one, tossing them into a massive pile by the front foyer. Next, I went to my home office. I loaded a fresh ream of paper into the laser printer and hit print. The machine whirred to life, spitting out hundreds of pages of high-definition betrayal. I arranged the financial documents, the shell company contracts, the home equity loan agreements, and the sickening photographs from Aspen in perfect, geometric alignment across the massive dining room table. I sat at the head of the table, perfectly still in the dim lighting, and waited. Just past 1 o'clock in the morning, the heavy wooden front door clicked open. They walked in together, completely drenched from the torrential rain outside, but laughing hysterically at some private joke. Clara was leaning heavily against Julian, his arm wrapped tightly around her waist. When they turned the corner and saw the mountain of black trash bags in the foyer, their laughter died instantly. Then, they noticed me sitting in the shadows of the dining room. Julian stepped forward, attempting to summon his usual charming, slightly irritated persona. "Adeline, what on earth are you doing sitting in the dark? And what is all this garbage doing in the hallway?" I stood up, gathered the thick stack of printed mortgage documents and the glossy photographs from the ski resort, walked right up to him, and hurled the entire stack violently into his face. The papers scattered through the air like grotesque confetti, raining down on the hardwood floor around them. Clara gasped, instinctively stepping back as a photograph of her kissing my husband in the hot tub landed face up right by the toe of her designer boots. I expected panic. I expected frantic denials, begging, perhaps even a desperate, tearful apology. I was entirely wrong. Julian stared down at the documents for a long, agonizing minute. I watched his facial expression shift rapidly from shock to calculation, and finally to a cold, hard defiance. He did not drop to his knees. Instead, he kicked the papers out of his way and glared at me with absolute contempt. "You went digging through my private files," he snapped, his voice dripping with venom. "Of course you did. You are a paranoid, controlling machine. You want to know why this happened? Adeline, because you always looked down on me. You treated me like a charity case, not a man. I was suffocating in this sterile, robotic prison you call a marriage. You have absolutely no soul. Clara is the only person who actually understands my value. She sees the genius you are too blind and too busy cashing corporate paychecks to recognize." I turned my gaze to my sister, fully expecting her to at least show a shred of familial guilt. Instead, Clara casually walked past the pile of evidence, brushed a wet strand of hair from her beautiful face, and dramatically sank into the custom velvet sofa I had paid for. She slowly crossed her long legs, looked me dead in the eye, and a slow, triumphant smirk spread across her lips. "Sister, we love each other," Clara declared, her voice so sickeningly sweet it made my skin crawl. "Feelings are something you absolutely cannot buy with your money. Adeline, you can buy this fancy house, you can buy his clothes, but you cannot buy his heart. He belongs to me now. Just sign the divorce papers and walk away with whatever dignity you have left. To be completely honest, our love is none of your business anymore. Just let him go." A sharp, bitter laugh escaped my throat. It echoed loudly in the cavernous room. They were not just parasites. They were completely, incurably shameless. They actually believed that their deceit was some grand, tragic romance, and that I was simply the wealthy, tyrannical villain standing in their way. "None of my business," I repeated softly, the words tasting like ash on my tongue. "You are standing in my house, wearing the clothes I paid for, breathing the air I condition, and funding your grand romance with a $250,000 loan stolen from my equity, and you have the audacity to tell me this is none of my business." I pulled my smartphone from my pocket. With 3 rapid taps on the screen, I accessed the central banking application. I instantly froze every single joint account, canceled Julian's platinum credit card, and revoked his access to the backup emergency funds. "What are you doing?" Julian demanded, taking a step toward me. I ignored him. I opened the Smart Home Administrative application. I terminated his biometric access to the front door, wiped his phone from the local network, and triggered the primary security lockdown protocol. The heavy deadbolts on the exterior doors clanked loudly as they unlocked, and the alarm system panel began emitting a high-pitched, steady warning beep indicating an unauthorized perimeter breach. "I just cut off your money," I stated coldly, looking directly at Julian. "All of it. The cards are dead. The accounts are frozen. The shell company funds are locked down pending a massive fraud investigation I will be filing first thing tomorrow morning." Julian's face went completely pale. "Adeline, you cannot do that. We have vendor payments due on Monday." "I just did," I replied. I turned back to my phone and dialed the number for the gated community's private security dispatch. "Yes, this is Adeline Powell at residence number 402. I have 2 trespassers on my property who are refusing to leave. I need a patrol unit here immediately to escort them off the premises." Clara jumped up from the sofa, her arrogant smirk entirely wiped away. "Are you insane? It is pouring rain outside. Where are we supposed to go at 1 o'clock in the morning?" "I do not care," I said, pointing a steady finger toward the open front door where the wind was violently whipping rain onto the porch. "Grab those trash bags and get out of my house, right now. You wanted him so badly. Clara, congratulations. You can have him, exactly as he came to me, penniless, pathetic, and carrying his entire life in a plastic garbage bag." 5 minutes later, 2 armed security guards arrived in a flashing patrol vehicle. Despite Julian's frantic screaming and Clara's hysterical sobbing about her ruined designer shoes, the guards forcefully marched them out into the freezing torrential downpour. They were not allowed to take a single item other than the clothes currently on their backs and the black trash bags sitting in the foyer. I stood in the warm, dry entryway, watching them stumble in the dark down the wet driveway. I closed the heavy wooden door, engaged the smart locks, and for the first time in 4 years, I finally felt like I could breathe. The ensuing divorce was not a negotiation. It was a highly orchestrated, absolute demolition. I did not waste my time crying to a therapist or grieving a man who never truly existed. Instead, I hired the most ruthless, ferociously intelligent team of corporate and divorce attorneys money could buy in the state of Washington. I handed them the terabyte of decrypted data I had pulled from the home network. The legal battle was swift, brutal, and entirely one-sided, by proving undeniable, premeditated financial fraud regarding the home equity line of credit. My legal team successfully pierced the corporate veil of their pathetic shell company. The judge froze every single asset tied to Julian and Clara. The court ultimately ruled that the entire $250,000 he fraudulently secured was his sole, individual liability. Julian walked away from our marriage with absolutely zero alimony, no claim to my retirement accounts, and a mountain of crushing debt. Predictably, the fallout extended far beyond the sterile walls of the courtroom. Just days after the final financial judgment was issued, my phone rang. It was my mother calling from Florida. Her voice was shrill, panicked, and trembling with misplaced, archaic suburban outrage. "Adeline, you need to stop this aggressive legal madness right now," she demanded, completely bypassing any acknowledgement of the profound trauma I had just endured. "You are going to completely ruin your sister. You need to withdraw these fraud accusations and settle this quietly to preserve our family honor. Clara is young and naive. She makes mistakes. As the older sister, it is your absolute duty to protect her and forgive them." I sat perfectly still in my quiet office, feeling absolutely nothing for the frantic woman on the other end of the line. The emotional tether simply snapped. "There is no family honor left to preserve," I replied, my voice steady, dangerous, and completely devoid of warmth. "And you people are no longer my family. You chose your side. Do not ever call this number again." I hung up the phone, permanently blocked their contact information across all my devices, and surgically severed the diseased, toxic limb that was my bloodline. Meanwhile, Julian and Clara, remaining true to their parasitic nature, immediately moved into a cramped, overpriced studio apartment on the edge of the city. Clara desperately tried to spin their unforgivable treachery into digital gold. She launched a massive, highly curated social media campaign, aggressively monetizing their new status as a tragic, deeply misunderstood couple, weathering a terrible storm created by a jealous, vindictive corporate monster of an ex-wife. She posted highly edited, tearful daily vlogs talking about their financial hardship, all while secretly plugging sponsored skincare products and asking her followers for support. I was told people actually sent them thousands of dollars in donations, but I watched absolutely none of it. I filtered their names from my network, ignored every piece of gossip, and completely starved them of the one thing they craved most: my emotional reaction. With the massive, suffocating weight of an ungrateful husband and a manipulative sister completely removed from my shoulders, I channeled every single ounce of my liberated energy into Vanguard dynamics. The relentless hyper-focus that Julian used to mock became my greatest, most lethal asset in the boardroom. I stopped simply executing standard engineering tasks and started aggressively restructuring entire departmental workflows and budget allocations. My analytical precision, combined with an unapologetic, ruthless decisiveness, caught the immediate attention of the executive board. I worked 100-hour weeks, outmaneuvering every obstacle in my path. Within 18 months, I bypassed 3 entirely different levels of senior management. I was officially appointed as the Vice President of Strategy, becoming one of the youngest female executives in the history of the corporation. Commanding a base salary and stock options that made my previous income look like absolute spare change. I promptly sold the suburban smart home. The very walls of that house held the lingering echoes of their deceit, and I absolutely refused to live in a beautifully landscaped graveyard of my own naivety. With the massive profits from the sale and my newly minted executive signing bonuses, I bought a sprawling, ultra-modern penthouse right in the beating heart of downtown Seattle. It featured towering, floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the sweeping metropolitan skyline and the dark, churning waters of Puget Sound. It was visually stunning, physically elevated, and utterly impregnable. I filled it with sharp architectural angles, minimalist art, and a profound, beautiful silence. I had finally constructed a reality where I was the sole, undisputed architect of my own life. I lived fiercely, independently, and rationally, making a silent, unbreakable vow to the glowing city skyline that I would never, under any circumstances, allow another human being to view my love as a weakness to be exploited. Exactly 5 years slipped by in a blur of corporate acquisitions, international flights, and relentless, unbroken success. My life was a meticulously calibrated machine, operating at the highest possible frequency, but the universe, it seems, possesses a very dark, deeply poetic sense of irony. While I was scaling the absolute pinnacle of the aerospace technology sector, Julian and Clara were busy digging their own graves. Their highly publicized design startup, the one they built on the stolen ashes of my home equity, was nothing more than a spectacular, glittering house of cards. They had spent the last half-decade aggressively courting venture capitalists, burning through millions of dollars in seed money to fund a lavish, completely unsustainable influencer lifestyle while producing absolutely no viable products. When the market shifted and the intense financial audits finally began, their entire facade violently collapsed. The news broke on a rainy Tuesday. It was a massive, catastrophic investor fraud scandal. They had falsified revenue projections, forged bank statements, and embezzled tens of millions of dollars. The federal authorities were circling, and the bottom line was brutally clear: unless they could secure a massive settlement of $20 million to quietly pay off their primary institutional creditors, both of them were going to federal prison for a very long time. I watched the financial news alerts scroll across my terminal with mild amusement. Assuming that would be the absolute end of it, I was wrong. The following evening, the private elevator chimes rang in the secluded lobby of my penthouse. The building concierge had made a rare, inexplicable error, allowing an unverified guest up to my floor. I opened the heavy mahogany door to find Clara standing in the hallway. The sight of her was genuinely shocking. The effortlessly glamorous, deeply arrogant influencer who had sneered at me 5 years ago was completely gone. In her place stood a frantic, disheveled woman. Her designer trench coat was heavily wrinkled. Her hair was an absolute mess, and her eyes were wide with a manic, unadulterated terror. She pushed her way into my foyer before I could even speak, dropping to her knees on the polished marble floor. "Adeline, you have to help me," Clara sobbed, her voice cracking hysterically as she desperately tried to grab my hand. I stepped back, my face entirely impassive, letting her grasp at empty air. "I am going to prison. Adeline," she continued, hyperventilating as tears streamed down her ruined makeup. "The authorities are seizing everything. My accounts, my passport, everything is gone. But it was not my fault, I swear to you. It was all Julian. He ran the finances. He forged the signatures. I was just the marketing face. I did not know what he was doing behind closed doors." I stood perfectly still, my right hand resting casually in the pocket of my blazer, where my thumb quietly pressed the record button on my smartphone. "Please," Clara begged, crawling slightly closer. "You have endless resources now. You know all the top corporate lawyers. I brought all the internal hard drives. I have his private emails, the original forged documents, everything they need to convict him and only him. I will turn over every single piece of evidence to the prosecutors if you just hire a legal team to secure me an immunity deal. Let Julian take the fall. He deserves it. Adeline, he manipulated both of us. He is a monster. Just save me, please. I am your sister." I looked down at the pathetic, cowardly creature groveling at my feet, perfectly willing to throw the supposed love of her life into a concrete cage just to save her own skin. I did not raise my voice. I did not express an ounce of anger. I simply pointed a single finger toward the elevator. "Leave," I commanded, my voice dropping to a freezing whisper. "If you do not step into that elevator in exactly 10 seconds, I am calling building security to have you arrested for trespassing." Realizing she would get absolutely nothing from me, her desperate sobbing instantly morphed into a vicious, feral glare. She snatched her bag from the floor, spat a string of profanities at me, and fled into the elevator. I locked the door, pulled my phone from my pocket, and saved the crystal clear, 10-minute audio file directly to my secure cloud server. The second act of their desperate tragedy unfolded early the very next morning. I was sitting at the massive granite island in my kitchen, sipping a cup of black coffee, when an unknown number flashed on my screen. I answered it, placing the phone on speaker. "Adeline," Julian pleaded. His voice was completely shattered, lacking any of the arrogant, artistic bravado he once wore like a shield. He sounded small, terrified, and utterly broken. "Adeline, please do not hang up. I have absolutely no one else to call." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "Speak." "The primary investment fund, the one holding our largest debt, just filed a direct civil suit," Julian rambled, his breath catching in his throat. "They are demanding immediate restitution of $20 million by Friday, or they are handing the criminal referral over to the Department of Justice. If I go to federal prison, my life is completely over. I will not survive in there. Adeline, I know I destroyed our marriage. I know I was a terrible person, but you are a vice president at a multi-billion-dollar corporation now. You have the money. You have the connections. Please, I am begging you on my hands and knees. You are the only one who can make this go away. We were family once. Save us." A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the sprawling, sunlit city of Seattle. "Julian, you are partially correct," I replied, my voice smooth, melodic, and terrifyingly calm. "I do have the connections, but there is a minor detail in your corporate structure that you clearly failed to research. Vanguard Dynamics recently executed a massive horizontal expansion strategy. We acquired several distressed debt management firms to diversify our corporate portfolio." There was a heavy, confused silence on the other end of the line. What does that have to do with anything? Julian asked, his voice trembling violently. The aggressive investment fund that just bought all of your company's toxic debt, the one demanding the $20 million and preparing the criminal referral, I explained methodically, is a newly integrated subsidiary of Vanguard Dynamics, and as the vice president of strategy, I oversee that specific portfolio. I paused, letting the crushing gravity of the situation slowly descend upon his panicked mind. I was the one who reviewed your file yesterday afternoon. I continued softly. I was the one who rejected your plea for a settlement extension, and I was the one who personally signed the executive order to fast-track the criminal prosecution against you and your company. No, Julian gasped, the word barely squeaking out of his throat. No, Adeline, you cannot do this. You cannot send me to prison. I am not sending you anywhere, Julian, I stated, tapping a few buttons on my tablet. Your own greed did that. Oh, and before I forget, I just sent an email to your primary address. You might want to open it. It is an audio recording of Clara dropping by my penthouse last night. She was very eager to hand over all of your private emails and forged documents to secure herself a federal immunity deal. It turns out, your true love is remarkably eager to watch you burn. I could hear the frantic clicking of a mouse in the background, followed immediately by Clara's voice playing through his speakers, crying, begging, and calling him a monster. Julian let out a guttural, soul-tearing scream of absolute despair, rage, and profound betrayal. He began screaming Clara's name, screaming my name, completely losing his mind as his entire world violently collapsed around him. I listened to the chaos for just a moment, savoring the beautiful, chaotic symphony of their mutual destruction. Oh, Julian, I said, cutting through his hysterical screaming with a perfectly calm, flat tone. I am very sorry about your prison sentences, but corporate business and the betrayal of your lover are none of my business. I firmly pressed the end call button, severing their existence from my life forever. I stood by the glass, looking down at the magnificent, towering architecture of the city. I poured myself a glass of vintage red wine, took a slow, appreciative sip, and left the two traitors to mercilessly tear each other apart in the absolute hell they had built with their own hands. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story. I would absolutely love to know where you are listening from. So please let me know your city or country in the comments section below. If you found today's story engaging and satisfying, please consider helping us out with just a $1 donation. You can scan the QR code currently displayed on your screen, or use the donation link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Your generous support provides the essential budget we need to pay our dedicated staff, helping them support their families and allowing us to continue creating even better, more thrilling stories to serve you in the future. Thank you again, and take care.